Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Behemoth album, The Satanist. Cal Chichester, you stop that right now, this instant. Making silly growling noises and devil horns is patronizing to metal fans. Heh, the more you know. They really do prefer that you go to my knowledge. Behemoth is the most infamous metal band to come out of Poland. They've been active since the early 90s, back when their records had a pretty old school, slightly run-of-the-mill black metal sound. The songs on these records were pretty lo-fi, but filled with archaic melodies, and even though there wasn't a lot of punch to these albums in this part of Behemoth's career, there was something kind of charming about how the compositions on these records felt centuries old. Now, as the band's recording quality got better with every new LP, they started bringing in elements of death metal. The band went even further down this road, coming together with a string of metal records in the early 2000s that to me were just straight death metal. Though personally I've never really been a big fan of these albums, I do think that at this point in Behemoth's career the band was sounding really savage and loud, but they didn't have much in the way of memorability or finesse. But this latest LP, The Satanist, comes 5 years after the release of Behemoth's previous album, Evangelion, which I believe is the largest time gap in between Behemoth records, which may have something to do with the fact that the band's frontman and guitarist, primary songwriter Nergal, was actually diagnosed with leukemia and has fought it and recovered since. Maybe that had something as well to do with the change of pace that Behemoth takes on this LP musically. The Satanist is easily one of Behemoth's most ambitious and dynamic records yet, and their black metal influences come back in a big way. Really dark melodies shine through these massive walls of blast beats and tremolo guitars, and there's some pretty epic arranged instrumentation added to the mix on this LP as well, with horns being the most stunning and exciting addition. The vocals on this LP are still pretty gruff, not a huge change from the band's earlier output if you've been listening to their death metal releases, but I do think the singing on this LP is a lot more raw. Definitely a huge improvement over the more barbaric blah on records like Here and Beyond. And there's some variety on these tracks too, some left hooks here and there, like on the track In the Absence of Light, which has this Polish spoken word interlude on it with a very distant sax solo hanging in the background. There's MESSE Noire, where right at the start of the track I can hear the vocals just cracking with intensity as they're being delivered right at the start of the song. Then there's the closer, which has these really harmonious background vocals just erupting in the background, just bringing this song's emotional qualities to just a higher level of intensity. It's so beautiful. The production on this LP too is fantastic. I can't really find a complaint about it. The drums are punchy, the guitars are loud, but they're not overpowering. The vocals as well. The guitar tone is very bright, it's burning. The bass is a little obscure, but when the band is playing riffs, it really does seem to shine out a little bit, though bass has never really been a lead instrument in black metal music. It's not really a huge loss. The metal instrumentation on this record creates a huge wall of sound, but there's just enough room left over for just a touch of reverb, a little bit of atmosphere, and all the additional instrumentation when and if the band decides to use it. The brass, the strings, the organ, the chorus vocals, and whenever stuff like this pops in, it doesn't really ruin the vibe of the song to me. It always adds to the very grim and hellish quality of this album. For a straight black metal record, the songs on this LP are really grand. I mean, there's nothing on here that is quite as epic or symphonic as, let's say, an early Emperor record, but I like that Behemoth was able to find a really satisfying compromise between subtlety and force. And the entire album itself actually plays with this dynamic, with tracks like Furor Divinius, as well as Amen, which has one of the most freakish endings on this entire LP, with all these layered vocals and just such a loud wall of guitars. But me personally, I mostly prefer the songs on here that have a stronger melodic element like MESSE Noire. And there are tracks on this LP too that I think are catchy. I mean, Behemoth really tried to write some strong choruses on a few of these tracks. Moments on here like the title track and Ora Pro Nobis Lucifer. That track has a really sort of unashamed rock guitar solo on here. I do like that Behemoth is so dark and is so intense on this record, but I think bringing in elements of just, you know, straightforward rock and roll, elements of more accessible shades of metal music does sort of show that Behemoth does want a visceral response from their listeners as well. And I have to mention that I do think there are some very sticky and memorable and enjoyable guitar leads that play throughout these two tracks too. I think the Satanist finishes off pretty well too with 3 very dynamic tracks, especially the closer, which is one of the best on the entire LP and the longest song too. I mean, it just feels like such a final moment on this LP. It feels like such an accomplished finish for this record, which is a relatively short LP. I mean, it's just about 45 minutes long. It's not really going to overstay its welcome or anything like that. My only major issues with this album overall is that the 2 shorter tracks on here, while they are very good songs, they do move at such a pace that they were a little bit of a blur on some of my initial listens to this album. Outside of that, I really loved this LP, even the lyrics, which I think some people may have issues with, seeing that they could easily sort of shove them into the corner for being a black metal cliche with all of this satanic content. However, I don't think what Behemoth did on this record was write a really tasteless spit in the face toward God and religion. I'm not saying this record isn't sacrilegious. It is. I took the lyrics on this LP as being more allegory, more of a narrative, more of a character portrait of Satan himself in some instances. Another thing that I could see people potentially getting down on with this LP is how progressive it isn't. This record is definitely not as experimental as some of the really weird black metal fusions that we've been seeing these days with rock and roll, progressive rock, post-rock, shoegaze, industrial music. But I think Behemoth does a fantastic job of justifying their more straightforward approach on this blackened death metal record with some very good, strong, solid, memorable writing, great sound, great vocals, very good performances, intensity, some fantastic drum fills, and just a really concise record with a good amount of variety that flows well from beginning to end. I think that Behemoth really lived up to their name on this record. I'm feeling a light 9 on this thing. Transition. If you've given this record a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, Behemoth, the Satanist, forever.